Thank you so much. Our next speaker tonight is our first impacted witness. She is a longtime Charlotte resident. She is a mother. She is among the most significant activists I know in the city. Meko McCarthy is going to come and speak to us a bit. She'll first give her testimony, and then afterwards she'll receive questions from the Reverend Glenn C. Redrick. And finally, after that, she'll have there'll be a statement that will be in response to what she said by Reverend Greg Gerald. Thank you so much, Meko. Welcome.
Hi, y'all gotta overlook me being in the car. I've been out doing canvassing and making sure we change the seat in the White House. So work don't stop.
I told you she was an activist, didn't I?
So work don't stop. So I just took a few minutes to jump on this call. So I'm glad to be here. I love a lot of the people here. My infamous mayor, Jennifer Rogers. So, love you. But let me go ahead and get to the point. Back some time ago in 2011, my son, Larico Williams, was murdered by a CMPD officer. He was tasered. The officer that tasered my son received training 3 months before he actually murdered my son. And that's a big problem. So people can talk about training officers. It has nothing to do with it. It has something to do with training, but not all, because this officer received training and he took it upon himself to do what he wanted to do. And a part of the process of going through courts, he lacked respect for his own superior, because it came out in testimony and through a deposition. He had an incident where he interfered in a pursuit, and his own superior requested for him to step down, and he declined. He testified himself that he was put on suspension for just 1 day, but to him, he was like, well, I kind of figured it was going to be a jump and run, and it was. So, okay, I got 1 day. So my point to that is, if you have an officer that's patrolling in the community that don't even have respect for his own superior to tell him to step down and do not continue to engage, because he don't really know what his superior may have seen, and he still disregard a command, that's a problem. Needless to say, some of the comments was very not acceptable or appropriate. In no shape, form, or fashion. You had comments that was made that had profanity. One of my issues come from one officer by the name of Anthony Payne. He said some inappropriate things, and the fact that both officers were like, oh, I thought he was faking. That's terrible, because if you don't know how to distinguish somebody faking from going in convulsions, you don't need a badge. And that's one major issue and concern that I've had through this whole process. And my son's case was treated as a homicide. You had Detective Ladden, Stephen Ladden, that was the homicide detective that was on the case, told me himself when I was at CMPD's headquarters, he said, regardless of what information we put together, good or bad, there's no district attorney in Mecklenburg County that's going to prosecute no police officers. And I was like, well, that's like a spit in the face. I say, so basically this officer can get away with murder. He was like, no, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that no district attorney is going to prosecute. And as we can see, nothing has been done, period, at all. Then to come to find out through a federal court case that I had, that Connor versus Graham, a case here, has been the problem. Connor versus Graham, I guess, is a CMPD case. So CMPD been reckless for years. It's no disrespect to Vicky Foster. I love Vicky Foster to death, but she's just one. And she can't be the face for everybody. When you put it in there, there's good officers, there are bad officers. It's a few that really want to impact the community and make change for the community, such as like Vicky Foster. But then you have some that they wake up, get in a car, drive an hour to purposely cause problems. I even heard an officer one time out doing a standoff The standoff went real smooth. This particular officer was like, wow, I thought we was gonna get some actions. I looked, and it made me look at policing very differently. Not just the fact of that comment, but the fact that there's really been no accountability with officers' actions. And I think if they start putting some of the liability on them, they'll think twice. Sheriffs will get terminated with no problem. CMPD, you have to go through hell and high waters to get an officer terminated. You have a chief, you have a city manager that really don't have no power. You have a civil service board, which is like a committee to me that should not make the determination whether officers stay or go. I don't think that's right. The purpose of us having a city manager is to manage. The purpose of us having a chief is for him to handle his people. So if you have a chief that make a recommendation for 67 officers to be terminated, and you have one particular committee that might be pro-police and don't care because it's not knocking at their doorstep, that's a problem. That's a serious issue. You have officers that feel like it's okay to tear people's property. Half the time they do it because they can't afford it. And they're mad because somebody else black is driving it. So they damage their properties. So, and they quick to say, we'll go to risk management. Then risk management makes the determination whether they're going to honor or whatever. But I feel like if an officer want to take the administrative approach and bust out a window or do any type of damage in the property, I think if CMPD start making some of that come out their personal checks, they'll think twice before they decide to go pick up their ass baton and bust out a window or damage somebody's car because it's going to come out their pockets. And I think that'll be a good way for them to start doing collective data reporting. Because if you have an officer that don't mind no money coming out their check, then you need to really check that officer. So once you start shifting liability, you start seeing a change. You really don't see too much. You might with sheriffs. Sheriffs know how to do community engagement. They come out, even if they're serving warrants, they'll come out to a scene. And even if a person's upset, they're going to have that conversation. Like, even if I leave, the warrant's not going to go away. So they have different type of conversation. They do more communicating. A lot of these police officers here, they don't want to communicate. I'm 47 years old, and I'm not finna have no 25-year-old walk up on me and tell me to shut the F up or, just do different things. No, we're not. My daughter is 30. So I'm not finna hear nobody else's chaps disrespecting me. I don't care what their title is, period. And that's a problem. You get some, and then you have some of these officers that may have been on the force for a little bit, and they need to be strategic about who they two-man. Because if you got a cop that don't respect black people, why would you want him to train somebody to train another racist? Because that's all you're gonna get. You're gonna and you have issues with a lot of these fake traffic stops. Um, I've had this conversation before in a lot of different rooms. When you want to look at racial profiling, don't nobody think about the fact, I'm sorry, you guys, when you look at racial profiling, nobody thinks about the fact of that there's a situation where they look at it as color, and it's not about color. In reality, racial profiling is a little bit past color. Racial profiling goes as far as you have car profiling, you have culture profiling. And what I mean by culture profiling, if a person that have locks, cornrows, a box, afros, four dreadlocks, or just the wild looks, but it's culture, they're gonna get pulled over if they have a 30-day plate, if they have a nice car, if they have big rims, or even if they have no rims. But if they're in a nice car and they're black and they have dreads, they're gonna find a way to justify the pinging, and it's a fake ping. They're gonna pull a person over, then it escalates. Because if a person's saying, "What are you stopping me for?" and you have an officer come up with something, they just dig something out the sky just to justify the contact. I had an officer do me like that. Um, it was a situation where a young guy, he was walking down the street, they pulled out guns on him, and I stopped and I pulled out my camera, recorded. And then they said that the guy fitted description or something, but then in the end, he wasn't even the person. It wasn't none of that. But it was just the way they handled the situation. So after me and a white girl was out there, she was recording, I was recording. She was like letting it be known. She didn't care nothing about what they had to say, nothing. But it was just interesting. I was to the side and I had my camera out. When I got ready to pull, the officer pulled behind my car. I still have the video footage too. He pulled behind my car. After he pulled by my car, he waited for me to get ready to pull off, and then he wanted to get to the car and say, "Hey, can you stop for a minute?" I stopped in the middle of the street, and I was like, "What?" He was like, "Can I ask you a question?" I say, "Am I under arrest?" "No." "Do you need my license and registration?" "No." I said, "Well, what do you want?" "This is casual. This is a casual contact." I said, "Ain't nothing casual about this contact. I'm free to go." Yeah, I drove off. I don't do conversations. If any police officer want to have a conversation with me, they can schedule a conference or a sit down time with Karani Truzy with Crumley Robbins and Associates at any time, which is my attorney. And I let them know that at every time. Otherwise, it's nothing casual. Um, One thing they did when it comes back, going back to my son's case, I had a major issue with the lack of respect that CMPD engage in. They're crooks. They're sneaky. Uh, they get away with too much. They shuffle paperwork. They trump charges. They put bogus charges on people. They do a lot. Um, my son, they put a fake case on my son and said that he was going to court the very next day after they murdered him for assault on a government official. It looked as so tacky and so shabby the way it was put in the system. I took a picture of it, sent it to my attorney, and I say, "What is this?" And you can tell it's literally like somebody copied and paste a criminal court case and put it on the screen and just did it. And the only reason why they done it is because they know how the media are. They love to go grab a person's background and try to justify the action, which, like I've told them before, I say you love to try to get a story, but at what cost? Then you go back to that person and want them to have engagement with you and give you their story when you've been disrespectful. I say tacky coverage get you tacky outcomes. You'll get blackballed eventually. You'll get disrespected. You won't be able to cover a story, and nobody's going to do no collaborations or networking with you. So when you go around and you quick to grab a person's background to justify the situation, I don't care about what somebody did 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago. I don't even care if a person was did prison time. Just because they done prison time, they paid for the action. Who's to say that what they went to prison for was a legitimate action? That's just a charge. That's what they say. So, and it's a lot of people that are in prison right now for things that they haven't done, but you have district attorneys. Well, I take that back. We're going to say the ADAs. You have the ADAs. You have a few judges. Somebody's married to this one, from officers to ADAs to whatever their professional is. They shuffle work. They pack records. We know they pad records. I have evidence of an officer that just recently went to a girl's house, a little young girl. She was probably about 20 some years old. She called me frantic in the midst of a police officer coming to her house, act like he had a search warrant, didn't have a search warrant. She called me. I went down into her house. I took pictures of her door. I took pictures of the so-called warrant. It wasn't a legitimate warrant. It wasn't even nothing that a judge signed. It was an old charge. The person who was already processed and in custody for. So I took pictures of that, and I sent it somewhere. I got actively involved more with politics when my son passed because of the fact I seen so much corruption. When I seen how they allowed these police officers to get away with murder, um, it became a major problem to me. So that's how I got actively involved in the community to make change. And that's when I met Robert Dawkins. And at that point in time, we was doing a anti-discrimination bill. And he wanted to lobby the bill, and we went to Raleigh. And at that time, then I still had my attorney to meet me in Raleigh when I did the lobbying. I just played zero games. It's a lack of trust in the community when it comes to policing. Um, it's a lot that the community is we are underserved, but we're flooded with officers. So you got to make sure you're understanding what I'm saying when I say we're underserved, but we heavily populated. See, it's a bigger difference to flood the community with a bunch of polices. But if we're not getting those services, it's not serving a purpose. You have all these. I was on the safety committee. Vicky Foster was on it too. I was on the safety committee. They gave me a whole list. Well, the committee, a whole list of different programs that they said they had. And they wanted to continue to fund them. And when I looked at them, it was so many programs I ain't never heard of in my life. And I said, well, where are these programs in the community? Where are these programs in the courtroom? Because when I've set up in the courtroom, I've never heard about none of these organizations. So if we're going to talk about deferred prosecution to make somebody spend some money, let's talk about these programs that you say that you got with a 99% success rate with urban people, from empowerment, enrichment, all of this, motivating, everything that sounds good. And like I told them, the numbers look real pretty, and no disrespect to nobody on the call. I just told them you have a white person that's a PR that seems like he noticed a lot of black people on there on the committee, and he know that some of them are activists and advocates. He knows some of them do utilize their social media platform, and they gave pretty numbers to look pretty to pamper. And like I asked, I'm gonna ask the questions that nobody want to ask. I asked, well, who are you serving? At-risk youth, scholar kids? Who are you serving? Because I ain't never heard of these programs. I don't see no police officer going when you go arrest somebody, when you go stand up in their court. Only thing you doing is talking to the district attorney how to criminalize and continue mass incarceration. You're not talking about these mentoring programs that you say has a 99% success rate for with black people. I haven't heard of them. They're not implementing them in the courtroom. They're not saying, hey, why don't you go there? They're not doing it through um, the kids that are going through since we have raised the age. I don't see them going into the juvenile saying, hey, we got a program. We have a list of this, a list of that. You don't hear about it. But it's interesting that they want the money. But what are we funding? Are we funding someone else's economics as far as how they live? I mean, I don't see nobody really benefiting from these programs. It's just a lot of different things that I have issues with when you really technically look at a lot of different things when it's coming to police. One thing, and maybe Vicky Foster can come back, maybe piggyback up on this, or maybe answer this question. An officer told me that Vicky wrote a lot of the policy. So with Vicky Foster writing a lot of the different policies, I guess when they did a lot of modifications and changing through whatever the policies, a lot of the policies that they go by. Um, I'm just curious to the fact what incidents or what casualties occurred which made them feel like they wanted to tweak. One other thing is a lot of times they reference the cases that an officer have committed. So like my son, he's in the training. They would never let neither one of my kids join the police academy. See, it's interesting. Let me go back. When they murdered my son, they asked for a list of all the family members. As they say, they wanted a list of the family members to determine the loss. There's nothing to determine. The determination was determined when we had a body. Names don't justify. It was a way just to harass. It was a way to, in a sense, blackball. And because there was civil litigation, but no criminal litigation, and it was mind-boggling that I had an all-white jury, so that he wasn't tried by any of Rico's peers, my son's peers, because nobody black was on there. They got mad at one lady because she said she looked at cops and put her off. They took another black person off, say because she had eviction. I don't understand what her eviction had to do with her serving jury duty,
Mm.
but it was an all-white jury, and they said that he used excessive force. So I don't understand here today why he still has a badge. They also have in their policy, their loyalty system or something like that. Well, it's interesting that you have that in writing, but you had Michael Forbes got impeached. We used his deposition to impeach him. So he still has a badge. So not only did he murder somebody, he also committed perjury under oath.
Mm.
So when you sit back and you say that you have a policy that's built off honesty and loyalty, what loyalty? Well, honesty, because we know he was impeached.
So, Ms. McCarthy, I want to stop you right now, just sort of in the interest of time, and I hate to stop you because there's so much more that we could definitely mine from your testimony. Just wanted to find out if Reverend Glency Redrick had a question that she'd like to ask of you, and then I'd like to hear from Reverend Greg Gerald to just sort of give us a sense of what you heard from Ms. McCarthy as she spoke.
First, I want to say, Meko, thank you for sharing your soul and your heart story with us this evening. Um, I'm sure many of us probably are feeling a sense of anger and disappointment. And knowing that you have bared your soul, I have one question that I would like to ask, given everything that you shared. And that would be, what, in your opinion, do white people need to understand the most in working to dismantle racism? Because most of what I heard shares with us the system of racism that is embedded within our law enforcement system within the CMPD.
I think it should be mandatory. I know they make judges take those interpersonality tests. I think it's an option, but I think they should make it a requirement. Because if you have a police officers, because it'll show what color they're going to be more prejudiced to. And I feel like if it's an option, you're not going to find the truth. The same way they allow police officers to carry a taser, but they told me that a lot of officers won't sign a waiver to get hit with a taser. So, and I find it interesting that they used to be quick to pull out a taser and use a taser, but you mean to tell me they didn't want to get hit with a taser? It's like, yeah, it's hard to get them to sign a waiver saying that, you know, if anything happened, them or their family won't do anything. That's very interesting. So they don't want it used on them, but they want to go in the Black community, point it as a gun and taser people and kill them. That's
Okay,
disturbing.
thank
So
you.
the interpersonality test would be one way, I think, but also they can't. To me, if you're gonna patrol in an urban community, you need to know how to engage that urban community. You cannot go in that particular community hostile. You can't go in there trying to belittle or degrade nobody. You know, it's not gonna happen because that's testosterone against testosterone, and then there's color against color, and nobody's going to allow nobody of another color to just disrespect them. I don't think nobody is. It doesn't matter what the color is.
Okay, thank you so much for that. If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about the North Carolina criminal justice and law enforcement system, what would that be?
Oof. Um, you have a pen so you can write it down?
I sure do.
Okay. So we're going to say starting off with the racial profiling. You look at the car profiling, 30-day plate profiling, culture profiling. That will fall up under racial profiling. Um, the fake, actually the trumped up marijuana charges, when they charge a person of color up to an ounce to a half an ounce, even if they have maybe a joint, they're going to still get an excessive charge, versus someone of another color of Caucasian will get a citation and that's it. So I would say all of those right there, if you take away all of those, the racial profiling, the culture profiling, um, the car profiling, the 30-day, the excessive marijuana charges, then I will ask you the question of what traffic stops would we really have?
Okay, thank you for that wish, and I did write it down.
Thank you so much. Thank you both so much. Reverend Gerald.
Ms. McCarthy, thank you so much for the way that you have shared with, I've seen the word candor in the chat, and I think that's a perfect word, the way that you have absolutely just offered us something from your soul. And so there are a couple things that I just wanted to reflect back, and if I don't get them right, then you can correct me. Feel free to. As far as the emotional content of what I heard, there's a lot happening. I heard your grief. I heard your courage, your profound courage. and I heard your rage, and I just want to acknowledge all of those things as being so important for us to hear and to bear witness to. Um, I heard the way that multiple different levels of systems have failed you and have failed your son. And so that begins with the police department here, and that even if the police department had policed itself, they couldn't have found a district attorney who would have done anything about it. And the civil service board is empowered by the state. And so at a state level, we've failed you as well. And for all those multiple systems to have failed, it just really is a travesty of justice. I also heard you mention many times just the importance of respect and the way that words from police officers added on to the trauma that you were already experiencing. The way that they spoke about your son, the way that officers have spoken to you personally or to other of your children or family members or loved ones, and the lack of cultural awareness that officers, especially white officers, bring into Black neighborhoods, and the way that that lack of cultural awareness looks like and often is, in actuality, lack of respect, and how that furthers the already difficult situations that so many of our Black neighbors are facing. And I also heard, and this is the last thing I want to say for now, that what's happening with our police department and our Black neighborhoods in particular, and your family in particular also, is the shifting of liability. So an officer gets to act however the officer wants to act without bearing any personal liability for that, or without the system being liable for that behavior. It is Black people, especially, that bear the liability for the way that officers act, up to including the death of people. That is unjust. It is not fair. And I thank you for sharing the way that that has impacted you. I hope that this can be another step in the way of changing that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yes.
Thank you
If
so
I
much.
can respond back,
Please.
just a going back, you summed it up pretty good. But one of the, I would just want to just say this: when you're looking at the communicating, I just find it very disturbing that with my son taking his last breath, I have to see a police officer purposely drive his car past to purposely not catch anything. That was disturbing, because the purpose of your dash cam is protection for the officer as well as the person that he's engaging. It captures the truth of what's currently going on.
Mhm.
But the biggest issue that CMPD have, they want to be movie directors. They act like they do a casting call. They do cutting, editing, they alter. They did that in my son's case that came out. His 15 minutes of audio was missing. I still have anything that anybody want to get from my son's case. I have no problem giving it to you. I went to every deposition. My attorney looked at me and said, Miss McCarthy, you know you don't have to come. I said, I haven't even had a chance to grieve. I say, but I got to be my son's voice from the ground up. Because for me to hear a police officer out there on the scene when this other police officer murdered my son, to come out and say, oh, you got tasered. Excuse what I'm about to say. His exact words verbatim was, oh, you got tasered, you shithead. I bet you that shit hurt. That's very tacky. And even the federal court judge stated and looked at the city's attorney, Newbold, Daniel Peterson, and Lori Keaton, which she was representing Michael Forbes. Daniel Peterson represented the city. Newbold just oversee what was going on. They looked at him. The judge say, I hope that y'all done something about that, because we don't have time for no police officers out there acting like we're in the wild, wild west. And they say, if you ain't done nothing, I hope y'all have done something or y'all gonna do something. He said, because that's unacceptable.
Amen.
That came from a
Thank you.
federal court judge.
Yeah.
Amen. And I'm glad that at some point in time, the system recognizes the problems in the system itself. So thank you so much for your testimony, Ms. McCarthy. Thank you so much for your, as Reverend Gerald said, your honesty. And thank you, Reverend Gerald and Reverend Redrick, for your questions and your summary.